I would like to thank Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamla, as she secured an OFAC license through her meeting with Marco Rubio for resuming Dragon gas field explorations jointly between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. This might be a hint that Marco Rubio is moderating a bit, and economic development for Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and the rest of the Caribbean is a more desirable option than war. This Dragon deal is operated by Shell Oil Company, which would also provide export opportunities for both Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela into the European Union. Trinidad and Tobago gas industry has been plagued by depletion of resources, and the Dragon gas field, as well as other gas fields in Paria Peninsula, Mariscal, Sucre Basin, as well as Plataforma del Tana, are close to Trinidad and can benefit from developed infrastructure of liquefied natural gas in Trinidad and Tobago. And Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago should resume their joint ventures and restore the recently harmed economic and diplomatic relationship. Ideally, this should also benefit Guyana, which has recently acknowledged that their previous ExxonMobil agreements were not fully acceptable for the needs of the Guyanese people. It would be wise for Guyana universities to implement a course on the history of Venezuelan petroleum exploration so that Guyana is spared the shortcomings that Venezuela has endured during more than a century. Venezuela has learned how to strongly negotiate favorable terms for our country, and it seems that Guyana also needs to do the same. We must remember that the westernmost part of Stabroek is not far from either Trinidad or Venezuela, and is adjacent to Plataforma del Tana gas fields. If Presidents Irfan Ali, Nicolas Maduro, and Prime Minister Kamla may hold a trilateral meeting, that would probably be more important than the meeting of any of them with Donald Trump, as Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela deserve a joint Northern South America and Caribbean strong oil industry that could be extended into Grenada and Suriname and perhaps Jamaica. The sovereign exploitation of our country's valuable petroleum and gas resources must be emphasized. The need of OFAC licenses, unfortunately, is a nuisance that we must deal with, as Russia and Iran also depend on OFAC licenses for normalization of their petroleum and gas trades. We must remember that sanctioned countries tend to be petroleum countries, and as we secure licenses, we are able to tip the balance a little bit towards our favor. Trinidad and Tobago population deserves the additional income and jobs that will be provided processing that gas from Venezuela, and Venezuelans through PDVSA similarly need this investment for developing mechanisms for untapping our gas resources. We must adhere to a win-win situation which ideally could settle a baseline for solving more complex geopolitical issues such as the Essequibo dispute. Countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Venezuela should consider our petroleum and gas union as an alternative to unreliable United States policies. We have seen how the United States government has been shut down due to an increased polarization between opposing political parties domestically. And we have the experience of Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, summoning all generals from across the world for an irrelevant meeting on war ethos that could have been made online. United States public opinion is increasingly rejecting the possibility of war against Venezuela. If Prime Minister Kamla and Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who manages the Venezuelan hydrocarbon sector, could meet and concentrate on specifics on how to make this deal possible, it would be a long shot. As customary, the United States guidance under Marco Rubio will require that the restored Dragon gas field deal does not provide any cash payments to PDVSA. While that is not an ideal situation, Venezuela has learned how to cope with that, as Chevron already has a confidential license permitting it to develop Boscan and Orinoco Belt oil fields. Most of that output is exported to the United States, and some of that output in barrels of oil is given back to Venezuela so that Venezuela can sell it to China. Even though Venezuela suffers many kinds of sanctions which requires us to reduce the price per barrel of oil, we can still produce for a profit. Similarly, it is important that Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela and Shell Oil Company design a business model that adequately compensates Venezuela for its partnership, perhaps by paying in kind in liquefied natural gas output so that it can be processed in Venezuela and sold to the outside world. Venezuela already counts with a gas facility at Guiria in Paria Peninsula, not far from the island of Trinidad. Perhaps this will be a good time for Venezuela to refurbish our existing infrastructure in Guiria so that we can process gas that will be legally awarded to Venezuela for allowing Trinidad and Shell exploiting the Dragon gas field. As Venezuela, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and the United States multilaterally solve our discrepancies, business conditions should improve for all of us. It is also necessary to remember that Chevron's output right now is less than the output that Chevron used to have in Venezuelan operations a few months ago before the previous license expired. Some people claim the reason is because of the challenges of employing barter and other kinds of compensation to Venezuela, as cash payments are prohibited. However, I suspect the main reason for a moderate conservative exploration by Chevron is mostly because of the threat of war and the threat of bombing. And Chevron, understandably, would not like to be very exposed to Venezuela right now due to the geopolitical threat of destruction of infrastructure due to war. Unfortunately, United States foreign policy, as we all know, happens through carrot and stick, not only with Venezuela, but with all other countries in general. It looks like the stick is not working out, as the United States has deployed a formidable military, and Venezuela has outperformed expectations on the military response we can do to support defense of our beloved country. This is the second time that Marco Rubio yields to pressures of either Venezuela or Trinidad and Tobago or other Caribbean countries or Chevron or Shell Oil Company to provide the OFAC license needed to develop our petroleum and gas resources. Standard economics suggests that trading nations do not involve into war. If Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela are able to restore their diplomatic and economic relationship, we should all abort the possibility of war, and that would also increase the likelihood of Trinidad and Tobago being well respected within the CARICOM countries, as there have been recent discrepancies among them because of the war threat. It is understandable that such a deal will be extremely difficult because Trinidad and Tobago has military agreements with the United States, and Venezuela has military agreements with China, Iran, and Russia. As we have seen in other parts of the world, there are many wars going on. Nobody wants a full-size war to begin in the Caribbean. And as a Venezuelan who has often protested against statements previously made by Prime Minister Kamla, this time I would like to support her efforts and thank her, because she can actually be the person who will avoid that the Caribbean gets into war. It is necessary that Venezuela de-escalates wordings against either Trinidad and Tobago or Guyana. In the case of Guyana, there is always this dream of building a binational refinery with Venezuela, which could actually be tri-national with Trinidad and Tobago, which is in between, in the Essequibo region, so that crude oil and gas from all of our countries can be refined or stored there. And that would entail roads and pipelines across Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela to adopt existing infrastructure existing in Trinidad and Tobago, and supporting refining needs that Venezuela will have as our oil industry recovers, as our national refineries will soon be working at full capacity. And of course, we must gain experience so that we can help out Suriname, Grenada, Jamaica, and Cuba to develop their petroleum and gas assets. It would be interesting to urge Marco Rubio to think about his family origins and any distant relatives he might still have in Cuba, and provide Cuba the opportunity to develop their gas and oil industry north of Varadero. Cuba's energy reserves deserve to be untapped, and for that to happen, Cuba will also need an OFAC license. Let's hope that international companies are also interested in developing Cuba's energy sector. We live in a multipolar world, and many citizens of the United States are already accustomed to the reality that many countries are important and that the United States is no longer a superpower. I have received messages from American citizens who would prefer, in case that a war starts, that Venezuela wins, because they do not think it is a just war. The human rights considerations concerning the shootings of civilian boats is strongly opposed across the United States, including many of military forces of the United States who have spoken about the subject. Pete Hegseth's speech on questionable values that do not represent American society at large, these opponents, which are a majority of the United States, would like not to engage into any war. Let's give peace a chance. Seeking peace is difficult. There are Venezuelan journalists living in the United States who are deeply involved in lobbying for war against their own country, and they ridicule recent New York Times article against war, downgrading it as a plea of Nicolás Maduro not to be killed. The Venezuelan high authorities know there is a possibility of death for anyone, but they are preparing various scenarios. And the best scenario is just to continue business as usual. The Dragon field project is business as usual because it was started by Shell and Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela under the leadership of previous Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and everything was working wonderfully. Exploration was advanced, and once the terms of the new agreement are known, which will involve participation of Venezuelan authorities such as Nicolás Maduro and Delcy Rodriguez, as well as Kamla Persad, and OFAC authorities under the guidance of Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent, we should be able to reach an OFAC license comparable to what Chevron already enjoys. We must also remember that Chevron also has interests in Loran Plataforma del Tana oil field, which is on Venezuelan domestic waters, not far from either Trinidad and Tobago or Guyana. President Irfan Ali seems to have moderated a lot during the last few weeks, as many population of the Essequibo region actually voted for his opponent, Nasruddin Mohammed. And also, APNU leadership has made strong opposition on voting conditions. And it looks like President Irfan Ali is concentrated now in healing wounds. Hopefully, Irfan Ali will follow the example of Kamla Persad and also apply for an OFAC license to allow PDVSA to participate in the Guyana oil industry as an investor in equal conditions as other investors they already have in Guyana. Of course, the Essequibo dispute will remain. Of course, Guyana will continue claiming that the outcome of Essequibo dispute will be settled by the International Court of Justice. And of course, Venezuela will keep saying that we will not recognize that ruling and that we will concentrate on dialogue. But still, we should initiate that dialogue in common grounds of economic development for Venezuela, Essequibo, and Guyana, and perhaps we will find a piece of hope to gather some consensus on our territorial dispute. We should not wait 100 additional years fighting between Guyanese and Venezuelans. It is exhausting. It does not benefit any of us. And the three countries together, Trinidad, Guyana, and Venezuela, with a possible extension of Suriname, Grenada, and Jamaica, and Cuba, we should be able to form a formidable oil and gas infrastructure and business model common for the whole region that will have a significant weight in OPEC. It is time for the populations of our countries to learn about each other. It is necessary for us to apologize if we have been too harsh on the other at any time. For example, a Venezuelan newspaper called Venezuela News said that Trinidad and Tobago are tutelado. I don't know what that word is in English, but in general it means that it just yields to orders from the United States, just because Kamla requested a new OFAC license. That license already existed under the last prime minister, and Venezuela also was tutelada then if we spent a great amount of effort along with Chevron for an OFAC license for our Zulia state operations led by Chevron in Boscan Field. In the current business environment, OFAC licenses are needed. BRICS countries have not yet designed an alternative to the United States dollar. That probably will appear in the next few years. Even Saudi Arabia, despite selling some of its output to China in Chinese yuan, still charges petroleum in dollars. The international system remains led by United States financial institutions. Most of the world is pressuring for that to change, but it will take time. So in the meantime, let's concentrate on securing OFAC licenses. It's better to have an OFAC license than not to have it. Venezuela knows how to fight for its rights. Venezuela has shown the world we have the capacity of military defense. And Venezuela has also shown it knows how to negotiate for acceptable conditions for the country in oil exploration, refining. And Venezuela also knows how to circumvent sanctions. And everybody knows Dragon is in Venezuela. There are other fields that are in Trinidad and Tobago, but the specific OFAC license Prime Minister Kamla requested is for exploration in Venezuela's Dragon field, which is close to the Trinidad and Tobago border, and it makes a lot more sense that the Dragon gas is exported to existing infrastructure of Trinidad than just build new infrastructure from scratch in Venezuela, as the Guiria liquefied natural gas is insufficient. This is a sound deal, and it is good news for the Caribbean that Marco Rubio and Kamla had this detente or de-escalation attempt, which will probably be welcomed by Venezuela. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez many times has stated as the highest hierarchy in petroleum deals that we are open to have petroleum transactions with any country in the world as long as payment is received. And so has Nicolás Maduro repeated often. Payments most likely will be in kind, in barrels of oil equivalent of cubic meters of gas, which will be sold by Venezuela to its regular customers once all of these deals are adequately sorted out. In the meantime, unfortunately, we must continue checking the military situation. United States will probably continue deploying more weapons into Puerto Rico, and Venezuela will continue fortifying its defense of Caracas, Lake Maracaibo, and other crucial locations. United States knows very well that every day Venezuela continues receiving additional support from its nuclear allies. However, it is significant that the military operations are not conducted by Marco Rubio. They are conducted by another person recently put in charge of the operations so that Marco Rubio can concentrate on standard United States foreign policy priorities such as Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, Palestine, Hamas, Iran, and China. De-escalation is difficult because we are accustomed to hate. Most of my own shows have also included some hatred and some intransigency, and from now on I will make my best to de-escalate my discourse, including apologies to anyone that I may have insulted, as my main goal is to promote peace while defending the national interest of Venezuela, of continue respecting our sovereignty, and to continue extracting our oil and building our infrastructure in an environmentally efficient manner, and promoting income badly needed by our population, which deserves economic growth. The next few weeks will continue this fight between the carrot and the stick. Let's hope that the carrot continues gaining ground for peace in the Caribbean Sea.